rather than to 8.1. So we're going to go turn the time over to Deputy Superintendent Angie Stallings.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, board members. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. We're going to be discussing the legislative requests or requests by staff and others for policy changes. The first one, I'll just remind you, would be to amend sections of code related to open enrollment. And just a reminder that open enrollment is when a student wants to attend a school district school that's outside of their district's boundaries. And this request would provide a preference for a placement for students who come from military families at a certain point in the process. Last month, there were a couple of questions you had that I'll go ahead and answer proactively. And then I just wanted to let you know, Chair, that we do have Brian Garrett here in the audience with us. He is the Deputy Director of Military Affairs with the department, the State Department of Veterans and Military Affairs. I always get the veterans and military swap. So Brian is also available if we start to get into questions that I can't necessarily answer.
Thank you.
He and others at the department are the ones who reached out to us with this request, and we're hoping for the board's support and one of the board's involvement in the legislation. So Ben, since our meeting, Ben prepared this graphic here that I hope is helpful to show the timeline of what happens with the open enrollment. And again, this is all in statute. There's an early application window and a late enrollment period. And you can see that this proposal, the students who come from military families wouldn't have a preference in the front end, but it would come after the early application period that they'd be able to apply and then be considered and provided a preference. Here were some of the questions that you all had that I'll try and answer. Number one, the first question was, couldn't we just do this in board rule versus having something in code? Ben and I took a look at that, and currently all of the open enrollment timing, everything related to like when students apply and how preferences are given, that is all in code currently. So if we were to address one portion in rule, it would be a little bit weird and disjointed because we have nothing in our rule. We do have a rule on open enrollment, but nothing in our rule talks about timing of application, preferences, lotteries, etc. So our recommendation would be that it does actually make more sense to have it in code where currently all of this is laid out so that we wouldn't have to like repeat it in board rule. The second question I know many board members had is, if students were to apply late, the students from military families were to apply late, is there an expectation for students who've already been given a seat or been awarded that placement at the district to somehow lose their spot or to be displaced? And absolutely not. There would be no, if a student has already received it through the early application window, a spot, those students would not, their placements would not be impacted. So I know that was a question. And so hopefully you can see through this graphic here, and it is in backup if having it on the screen isn't working for you. You can see where the proposal would be that generally military families receive their transfer orders between January and April. Oftentimes it's going to be after that February 3rd deadline for the early application. And so anyway, hopefully that's helpful. I know that when we were talking to Mr. Garrett about this, they talked about how this has worked really well with the charter school enrollment, because what happens, I don't know if you know, but military students, charter schools may provide a preference for students from military families in charter schools. And as you know, oftentimes, maybe not often, but students will kind of drop out or say never mind on their enrollment, maybe the week before school or the first week of school. And it's been nice for military families to be able to pick those up later on. And so that's kind of what they're hoping for, is that they can be considered and that maybe as students or spots come open in that late enrollment period, that the students from military families would be considered. So I'm going to pause now and see if you have any questions. And again, Brian Garrett is available to answer any questions that I can't.
We do have one question. Board Member Earl?
Yes, we have the numbers of active, let's see, active duty children in Utah, which is about 5,000. How many do we normally have coming in that this would be impacted?
Is it okay if I?
Yes. Will you introduce yourself into the mic, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Brian Garrett with the Utah Department of Veterans and Military Affairs. We usually see about 660 kids transition both in and out each year out of Hill Air Force Base. And those were numbers that Hill provided us this week. So it's roughly a net zero, but it's right around 600 coming and going each year.
Okay, because they're going as well, that's
Yeah,
why. And then also National Guard, those ones aren't coming and going so much. So
Very-
I'm just wondering the relevance there.
Nominal. What we try to do when we look at education legislation or any legislation is parity between the Guard and Reserve. We do have a small number of National Guardsmen and reservists that transfer around, much like active duty. But if I had to guess the number of kids, I would put it in less than 100, probably more towards the 50 range in those transfers. They're not as pronounced as the active duty children coming and going.
Thank you. Seeing no more lights, Angie, go ahead.
So you would like me to go ahead to number 2?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Next, the next policy request would be to require charter school special education directors to hold an appropriate licensed educator license. And this would be to come into compliance with IDEA law. So those of you on the Law and Licensing Committee have already heard this, as well as all of you on the board may remember that recently we came to find out that, for example, LEA-specific licenses couldn't be used for special education compliance. And so even though right now in state code, there's a provision, and it's in 53G 5407. It states that charter school administrators and other supervisory roles are not subject to the same licensure requirements as school districts. Our staff have read that IDEA requires those who supervise students in special education or students with disabilities need to have an appropriate license. And so, and that's what this request would be. I know this is a big one because I know that there's many of our charter school administrators who may not have a license. And so both Leah Voorhees and Malia Height are here to help answer questions. But again, it's similar to the discussion that Law and Licensing had a month or two ago related to what IDEA law requires as far as licensure and qualifications for those who oversee and work with students with disabilities.
Thank you. Board Member Hutchins?
A question, please, for.
Yes.
What would be the effective date?
That's a good question. We could probably, I don't know that that's been answered or decided. So there probably could be some sort of a transition period. I will say that what our staff is concerned about is maybe that we're currently out of compliance. And I don't know if Leah or Malia had any idea about or ideas for an effective date, but we could maybe do it for like July 1, 2022, or if there was feedback that it needed to be less or more. I just don't think we've decided that.
You're good with that question? Okay, Board Member Moss?
I appreciate Board Member Davis clarifying some of this. We were talking a little bit on the break. I'm just trying to make sure I understand what exactly IDEA requires and how far this would go to meeting that IDEA standard or whether it would exceed it. And so I guess the first question is, I had some understanding from somewhere that if you have a bachelor's and sufficient experience, you could supervise, not necessarily teach, but supervise. I don't know if that's correct. And then I guess the second part, and I'm sorry, Chair, I'm squeezing in two parts. They're related. To what extent would this match those IDEA requirements, or would it exceed it in the nature of the license that it requires?
Okay, so do you want to answer the first question first? Okay, have you got that, Malia?
Yes. Malia, hi, Educator Licensing Coordinator. So the requirement within IDEA, which is Section 156, states that anybody who is providing services to students with disabilities or supervising individuals providing supervising the instruction needs to have a bachelor's degree and significant training in the content of special education. And so our current license structure allows for an individual to qualify for an associate level license if they meet those requirements, and then can meet the IDEA requirements. The policy request is asking that currently we have special ed directors that are serving in charter schools who have no educational training and no licensure, and some with no background checks. And so because the law currently, the state code provides that there's no licensing requirement for charter directors, then we're seeing that our special ed directors who are serving our most vulnerable population of students have limited and some with no training at all.
Okay, do you want to ask part two again, please?
Yeah.
Turn your mic on again, please.
That's very helpful. Okay, so as I understand it, then this would require a license with the idea that that would presumably make sure that they had those other things that IDEA requires, even though IDEA doesn't specifically require a license. This would be a policy choice that some license would presumably give them the training. What kind of license would it require then? Because I understand it would alter an exemption that otherwise applied to charters. Where would that put them? An administrative license, a SPED license, a professional and associate license?
So currently, special ed directors that are serving at a district are required to have a school leadership and administrative license. And that is something we can address in board rule should this policy go into effect in statute, that we could address not only when it would take effect, but also what kind of a license or license area is required for these individuals, whether it be administration or school leadership, administration, or special education. And so we can attend to those particulars within board rule.
Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Hart?
Can you go back to what you were just showing? Thanks. It says that they hold at least a bachelor's degree. Are you interpreting that to say holds a bachelor's degree in special education?
Malia?
No, we are not.
So-
It's a bachelor's degree in any degree area. The special education training, which is at the very top, is the part that that is special ed specific.
So any bachelor's degree and then some measure of
Correct.
Of special education training?
Yes.
Have you already outlined, follow-up?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you already outlined what that additional training would require?
Yes, so we have worked closely with special education here at USBE to provide a variety of flexible ways for individuals to demonstrate that they have the competencies within special education, whether that is attending state-sponsored training or passing a praxis exam because they've already have the information. So we're providing lots of different ways for individuals to demonstrate that they have that content knowledge.
Thank you.
Board Member Lear?
I have two questions related to this, but unrelated to each other.
Okay.
So the first one, I just want to make sure because I was just badgering Cindy about this, and I want to make sure that it was not for naught. That are we just casually using the word license? Isn't it still true that you have an educator license and then you have an area of concentration or an endorsement? So we're casually saying we're equating those to licenses. Is that true?
Yeah, so an individual may only hold one educator license, and within that, they may have a variety of license areas of concentration. Special education is one of those license areas of concentration, as is school leadership or administration.
So we're really talking about that, not separate licenses, which maybe doesn't make any difference, but.
Right.
And then the second, if I
Go ahead.
can. The second question is, are we being preemptive in getting this, in making this change? Or are we responding to an audit or a review? Or did we seek out the IDEA specialists at the federal level? Why now, when this has been the same for 10 years, 10-plus years?
I think that part of what we have done is we've dived into IDEA and met with several lawyers that are specialist compliance officers throughout the nation, that we're trying to ensure that our entire system is in compliance with IDEA. And so there are some things that we've just now it's been brought up to us that we're like, oh, we need to fix this now.
And one final related.
I think Leah maybe had a comment back to that one, if that's okay.
Yeah, could I add, Chair?
Yes.
So yes, we are being preemptive. However, we're being preemptive because the Office of Special Education Programs, if you remember, I told you last year at this time that they were going to be coming this year at this time to do a monitoring visit.
Oh, okay.
But then because of COVID, they postponed that monitoring visit. But we have been going through all the protocols to prepare for that monitoring visit. And this is one of the areas where we recognized that we had a significant problem. So they will be coming to do that monitoring visit. Supposedly, they'll be coming next year.
Okay.
We don't have a schedule yet. They're still working on that. But it is preemptive. But there was an internal needs assessment that led to this point.
And the consequences of non-compliance would be a withholding of state sped funds, or just, well, you better hurry and get your ducks in order?
Go ahead, Leah.
Yes, yeah, they would put us, thank you, Chair, they would put us on corrective action, and if we were not complying with the corrective action, it would be a withholding or suspension of federal funds.
Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Davis?
Yes, Chair, I'd like to first publicly acknowledge that Carol Lear was right and I was wrong. So, thank you very much. I hold an educator license with an area of focus in administration. I apologize for my incorrect language and semantics. So, listen, you were not really badgering me, but I have been badgering our good folks, trying to wrap my head around this and trying to figure out where our responsibility is, what's in IDEA, what's in state law, what's in board rule, and how this all works together, and if we have any areas of flexibility. And so what I'm hearing ultimately is that what it boils down to is we have some special education directors currently who are supervising special ed services and specially designed instruction that not only don't have a special ed license or an administrative license, but they don't even have a teacher license. Like, there's no license at all. And the federal government is not saying it has to be a license. However, we, for all intents and purposes, not having a completely fleshed out competency model, et cetera, have determined that a license is what could show competency. And if this moved forward, it would be, there may be some flexibility that we ask in code. It might be, a license with, it could be flexible, like an area of administration or an area of special ed, or however we decide to do that. Until such time, if we ever get A, B, C, D, E, and F to really show that this person really would be qualified to supervise specially designed instruction. Am I getting it
She's
now,
nodding
finally,
yes.
after a
Chair,
whole
if I
day
may.
of texting you back and
Go ahead.
forth?
Yes, that is correct. We, as the board, you hold the power to provide that flexibility within board rule. So if the policy is changed and the statute is changed to say that special educator directors must have some sort of licensing requirements as defined in board rule, that's where our flexibility lies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Hutchings?
Permission to ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
And this should have been a follow-up, but I hadn't put it together yet. Wouldn't it be maybe a good suggestion, I'm saying because it's mine, that there's a pathway included, that there's a time that we say, for example, with the LEA licenses, we say by a certain amount of time they need to have a license through the LEA, and then we give them however amount of time is reasonable to obtain that licensure. Because I understand it's a compliance issue if they're not licensed, but it's also a compliance issue, I would imagine, if we all of a sudden have charter schools that don't have special education supervision. Question mark?
Yeah, there certainly is room for that kind of a rollout, and anytime that we make an adjustment to licensing, we have to notify the field within and give them at least 1 year. That's in statute. So that would be a minimum of time rollout, and we would certainly provide technical assistance.
Thank you. Thank you, Board Member Hutchins. Board Member Leary, your mic is hot.
Sorry.
Chair Huntsman?
Yeah,
Oh,
so the
sorry.
way I'm seeing this is almost like taking a similar path as our LEA-specific license. This is progress, not perfection. And we're trying to get something started so that we can work through these, I use the term a lot, betterments, and then over time it'll just get refined. So that is what I'm seeing that you're asking is let's get in line so we can deal with the statute or a statute. And then we'll pound out these details. Is that what I'm hearing, correct?
Baby steps.
Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Earl?
Yeah, my question has to do with, do we know the current impact?
Yes. Oh, my password is very long and I have one very bad hand. So I sent it to her. I know that currently we have under 5 charter school directors that have no licensing at all, and we have some with no background check, which we're following up with.
Oh, my gosh. Names.
Oh, do this one right here.
Oh, okay. Oh.
We have numbers. 26% of special ed directors at charter schools have a school leadership license area of concentration. And 81% have a special education license area. But you can see that there are 2 individuals who have no license or an expired license. And then we have also some additional with no license at all in Cactus, and those are not represented since they're not in our database.
Okay. Okay, I'm just trying to, and we don't have any districts, right? I mean, because they would.
So the district numbers you'll see in column D and E. So 89% of district special education directors have a school leadership license area, and 76% of them have special ed license areas. We're seeing in more our rural or the tiny LEAs, public districts are where we're seeing educators that don't have those qualifications serving as special ed directors.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Moss?
Thank you. Most of my comments have been addressed, but I guess one follow-up question. I was concerned about the ability to comply. I understand the urgency comes from potential audit, and that compliance, it sounds like, could be met with tagging up to the letter of IDEA. Is there an option in this proposal that would allow a charter to either get the license or otherwise demonstrate compliance with IDEA? Is that a possibility?
Chair, if I may.
Go ahead.
One of the great things about the new licensing structure is that it is competency-based. That is what's providing us with the flexibility to have individuals demonstrate that they have competency and that we can assess those competencies, and then award the license. So as long as they have a bachelor's degree and have shown some level of basic preparation, they're qualified for the associate license.
Go ahead.
Very tiny follow-up. How long does that take? If a director needed that competency-based license,
They
so
could-
that they don't lose their job in the middle of otherwise very trying times, right? That's where I'm worried.
Yeah.
What would it take to get that?
It is potentially as simple as completing a couple of Canvas courses, modules that are significant in time as far as seat hours, maybe 40 or 50 seat hours. But in the grand scheme of things, 1 week of full-time work would potentially grant you the competency to be qualified for an associate license, as long as you already have a degree.
Thank you. Board Member Hart?
Yeah, so on that data chart, if they have the 89% that, and you might have already said this, but just again, do those people need to get the special ed part of the, so they're fully qualified on that top line?
Yes, as per board rule, current board rule, if they have a school leadership license area, they're fully qualified to serve as a special ed director in a district.
Okay, thanks.
Board Member Hymas?
Yeah, just to clarify that where they can get, not licensed, that's not the term, but, right?
The competencies?
Yes, like, is it through the USBE? Is it through the LEA that they can do the work through that? Is this canvassing through a higher ed system? Right, what are the options? Let's say that I today said, I'm changing career paths. You guys have made
Welcome
it
to
so
special
easy.
ed.
Yeah. So what are those options for somebody who is doing this and the person who's wanting to come in? Like, where do they go for that? And how convenient are we making this for those special ed directors?
So we currently, within special education, have a small licensing, small but mighty, licensing team in special education that is providing personalized support to any educator who wants to provide or demonstrate those competencies. They can be done through coursework through USBE. They can be done through university coursework, through a praxis exam. There's a lot of different options that we're trying to provide those flexible opportunities for anyone who wants. It's kind of like, we call it the choose your own adventure. If you do this, then you can do this and this, or maybe you do this and not that, or so that we can make it as available with as few barriers as possible.
Go ahead.
But the LEA doesn't have the flexibility to say you are now a qualified special ed director or whatever you.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Earl?
Yeah, I just had another question. Most of our districts probably have special education directors. Would that be an accurate statement, other than maybe the rural? Do our RESA, our regional service centers, do you see what I'm saying? I'm just wondering how that works. And then along with that, just to kind of piggyback on that, how many of our charters do have a special education director? And if that was the case, if they had that, the administrator themselves would not need to do this. Is that accurate?
Yes, so I will have Superintendent Voorhees help with some of that, but if you look at line 10, there are 58 individuals in a charter school with the assignment of special ed director, and in districts, 37. So that's how many people have the assignment of special education director in the state.
Okay, so those are just the director assignments. For some reason, I was correlating that with an administrator.
No, so these are special education directors that
Okay, but it could be that. Is that accurate? It could be, the administrator could be the special education director.
Sure,
Okay,
it could
okay.
be half
We just
half
don't-
special ed, half charter director,
okay.
yeah.
Chair, may I add?
You may.
Thank you. So to answer the RESA question, none of the RESAs have special education directors that I am aware of. However, at least one has a special education consultant. And one of the reasons that that number in charter schools is so low, because we have 120 plus charter schools, but only 58 who are in Cactus have the assignment of special education director, is twofold. One, to Malia's point, many of them are the teacher, or to Board Member Earl, your point, or an administrator of something else. And so their assignment would show up as the something else, okay? But also because in charter schools, some of them contract that service of special education director out to a vendor. And so the director role is not an FTE. The director is a contractor. And so that's why the percentage of FTE from district to charter is so significantly different, because quite a few charter schools contract out that role.
Thank you. Vice Chair Davis?
I was just thinking, looking at the numbers, I mean, if we moved forward and required a leadership license, then it would impact 24% of our current charter directors. But if we added flexibility and required a license either in special ed or leadership, it would impact 3% of our current folks, which is 2 people, and they don't have to go get a bachelor's degree. They do have a bachelor's degree already meeting that piece of IDEA, but they would have to get the license, which would be a way we could show that they have the skills and experience necessary as required in IDEA. And to get a license, they no longer have to go to 4 years of schooling. They could do these, take the praxis, or do these competency models and work with their LEA and with us and get the license. And then moving forward, there would be an understanding that a scenario like this with no license in anything probably really wouldn't be appropriate for a special education director in Utah. Does that sound?
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I was going to say, I see no other
Oh, I'm
lights.
sorry.
And I'm going to close my eyes, and I still don't see any lights. Board Member Lear.
Don't see me, don't see me. I do think it's important to note, because in our discussion, it's sounding like this either or of a special ed license or a leadership. It sounds a little, arbitrary. But it's not, because I think it's important to point out that if you have that school leadership, or whatever it's called now, LEA leadership license, you've taken a whole course in special ed law.
Not necessarily special ed law, but yes, law.
But they don't have separate special ed law anymore in
No.
all of them.
It's
But
just
at least
one
you had
course.
a corner of it
Yeah.
in that experience. So I think that's an important, it's not an arbitrary, this license works, this license works. There's a reason that that one license is applicable.
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure but I didn't know that there were not, I mean, that makes me a little less satisfied, but it is, we are where we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, seeing no lights, Angie, we can go on. Thank you, Malia, and thank you, Dr. Voorhees.
Great. I will now go to number 3, and this would be to amend the Utah False Claims Act to include public education claims, or create an Education False Claims Act separately, but based on, in part, the Utah False Claims Act, or there's a federal False Claims Act also that could be modeled after this. And I wanted to mention that this specific policy request has been discussed by the Audit Committee, and it was voted on as a recommendation that the Audit Committee supported seeking this legislation. Debbie Davis, Zach Christensen, and Brian Quessenberry, I think they all have background on the why. I unfortunately wasn't present for the audit committee discussion of this particular item, but the Utah False Claims Act is right now related to medical billing. And when people are making requests for funds and they do that fraudulently, where they're trying to get funding for claims and they're not legitimate. And so the idea would be we provide, and when I say we, it's USBE, it's LEAs, provide a lot of services or provide a lot of funding, have subrecipients, people who are doing things on behalf of education, on behalf of us or LEAs, where there may be, they say they've provided a certain service and then they're trying to collect from us compensation for those services they provided. And if they do that fraudulently, that's my understanding of what this would be, but for education. So, and there are, as I mentioned, there are 3 other USBE staff that probably know way more than I do about this, but that was my best summary.
I don't see any questions. I do see a question. Board Member Hanson.
Thank you. I just wondered if staff could maybe enlighten us on some situations that we've encountered where having this False Claim Act be applicable would have been helpful to us.
Is that going to be Brian or Debbie? Who's that?
So Brian Questenberry, Assistant AG here for the board. Without getting into too much detail, because it's an ongoing matter and I just can't, but we have seen what we believe have been misrepresentations to board staff for certain reimbursements, for example, that didn't happen, or they just were not, essentially, they misrepresented something to get money out of a program here from the board. And so we wish that we had this tool available as leverage or to legitimately pursue vendors that do that kind of thing. So it has recently happened. And I'm happy to share a little more sensitive information offline about specifics if that's it.
If I can follow up, I was actually thinking maybe further back, not ongoing stuff.
Oh, more
but,
like a
you know,
distant,
in the past, there's some things that have been put to rest where maybe this would have been helpful.
Well, I can think of in, like in the Questar matter, in the RFP, we felt like there were some misrepresentations there regarding their reliance on and use of ETS kind of as their big brother to help out, which didn't happen. That case is done, so that's a little more distant in the past. This could have been helpful in that situation. So those are that, and then one I can't really talk about are the ones I'm thinking about in my mind.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Oh, sorry, one more follow-up, if I may. I
Of course you
apologize.
may.
Yeah.
Of course you may.
So-
I just want to remind, we got to be really conscious and careful of what might be
Yeah,
out.
got it.
Okay,
This is
thank
a-
you.
So this is limited right now just to medical. Is there any other application besides, is there another False Claims Act provisions in the
Yeah,
code?
there certainly is the federal one, which is fairly broad. And the idea there is you just can't lie to the government to get money. So the most recent one is the PPP, the Payroll Protection Act, which had billions of money that and folks were not eligible, that they represented themselves as eligible, or they double dipped, and essentially defrauded the government out of a lot of money. I know those are ongoing. That's a great example of kind of using a very broad False Claims Act to kind of assist the government in recouping some of that. Ours is very narrow, limited right now, and so if it was broad, that could be helpful to us.
So it would be applicable in areas other than education if we were to amend it to broaden it out? Is
I
that,
would think so, sure.
that'd be the ask to the legislature?
Yeah.
Thank you.
For example, just one last thing. Some states like California, their state version essentially mirrors the federal version. There's a lot of duplicity or duplication there, but they can now use the state version if they wanted to and avoid the federal side of things.
Okay, thank you. All right, seeing no other lights, Zach, thanks for coming to the table. I would then, after this discussion, Angie, it was just the 3, correct? Thank you. I would be seeking a motion to accept these, would it be to direct staff to work with legislators on potential amendments to Utah Code? As presented. So moved by Board Member Cannon. Second, Board Member Straight? Okay, so the motion, do you want to speak to your motion? No, thank you. Okay, so the motion before the board is that the board directs staff to work with legislators on potential amendments to Utah Code as presented. Seeing no discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Superintendent. Okay, we will go back to 8.1, so if you're tracking with us. So this will be Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones and Fiscal Policy Analyst Dale Frost.
Madam Chair, Deputy Superintendent of Operations Scott Jones, can we also invite School Finance Director Sam Uri to the table?
Well, only if you can have a minute to introduce him to us all.
I will. So, to my left is the excellent Dale Frost, and to his left is the excellent Sam Uri. Sam is our new School Finance Director. I think I've introduced him to you.
Yeah, we
But
just
he's
need
an
to
integral part
memorize.
of this process. So for this particular agenda item, Madam Chair, members of the board, this is a perpetual item, leads all the way up until the start of the legislative session and into the legislative session. As you know, by law, last month, we were required to send forward your proposals to the governor's office. That's a requirement that's in the Budgetary Procedures Act. It is law. We can, though, continue to develop your business cases and your funding requests. And we want to do that because we want to obviously be prepared for when the gavel first drops in the legislative session. We've experienced great support from both the governor's office and the legislature, especially for public education finance over the last 4 to 6 years. You can see marked increases in public education funding going from your process here into the schools, in excess of $1 billion in the last 4 to 6 years. So, but with that, we want to make sure that we do come back to this agenda item and provide you any and all updates or information that's necessary for you to stay up to speed on all the moving pieces and parts that ultimately results in what we request for public education funding from the legislature. So, Madam Chair, if I could turn it over to Mr. Frost for the motion, or?
I think that we're doing the business cases next after, but.
The
Board Member-
presentation, right?
Yeah, but Board Member, are we doing a presentation first or Board Member Hanson?
Well, I think you have the motion first, so I was
Yeah.
going to turn it over to Mr. Frost, though. You want to do the motion first?
Well, the Board
Yeah.
Member Hanson has his hand up,
Right,
so
okay.
I'm going to go
If he
to
wants to
him.
do that, yep, got
Thank
it,
you.
okay.
If the time is right, Madam Chair. Is now the
I
time?
think it
Okay.
is.
I have a motion for the board related to the ranking of legislative priorities. The motion is that the board directs staff to provide board members an opportunity to rank order business cases via survey by November 16th. Also to direct staff to provide the final results of the survey as backup to Civic Clerk for the board's discussion of funding priorities in December, and to discuss the results of the rank order process during the board's December meetings.
Do I have a second? Second, Board Member Moss. Would you like to speak to your
Thank you,
motion?
if I may.
Thank you.
This motion is really directed to my concerns that the order of ranking that we present to the legislature doesn't accurately reflect the collective voice of the board as far as priorities. I think that we're really limited by the parliamentary procedure process in, well, you saw what happened in our last meeting. It took us an hour to swap one item up and push one item off and then add one item to the list. And I don't think that gets everyone's voice reflected in the list that goes to the legislature. I believe that through a process of rank ordering, and I think that Dale or Sam have a couple of charts. I could show you how this might work, if that's okay, Chair.
Yes, continue.
Okay. What we would do is have a list of the business cases. The amounts of the business cases would be listed, some other information about how that applies to the strategic plan. And then we would have, as board members, the ability to rank the items 1 through 10, with 1 holding 10 points and number 10 holding 1 point. So we'd go through and select our top 10. And then we would turn that information, I think we could do that through maybe a Qualtrics survey has been suggested by staff. This information would be collected by staff. Dale and his crew would have something like this, that last chart to wade through. We wouldn't see that necessarily, but they would give us a chart that looks like this. So it would have the total number of points received by each one. That would be ranked. So you can see there, number 1, 56 points, number 2, 47 points. And then the total number of votes received. So how many board members voted for an item. So we'd have that information then to discuss in our board meeting and then proceed as we see fit from there. But I really think that this would engage all board members in the process and be more of a representative picture of what the board feels is important. And also we can look at the cutoffs for the various financial scenarios. So here, the little chart on the left was a little hard for me to follow, but you can see each of those business cases being stacked. This one's a little bit easier for me to comprehend, that running total column. So that just totals the business cases in order. So if we said we had 400 million, we could go down and see that 13 of those business cases would be able to be done within that $400 million. So that's the proposal. I'm sure staff is capable of answering any questions. They're a lot more into the details than I am. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions on this? Board Member Earl?
I think Board Member Lear might have been ahead of me, but I'll be quick.
Oh, sorry.
What if something does not get any votes? I'm just curious. I actually love this idea because I feel like that's a more accurate representation, but can we
Okay,
just?
thank you. You know what? I'm going to go to Board Member Hanson because he has spent a lot of hours thinking about this.
I can address that one. And my proposal would be that those items just go to the bottom of the list. So they would have 0 points. They would still be there. If something came up in one of our board meetings where someone advocated for that or new information came around, the business case would still be there and it could receive votes in the next ranking, assuming that we go through as we have in the past and readjust this list every month until the legislative session. So nothing would drop off. In fact, things would be added as time goes on. Like today, we're going to add some more business cases to this.
Thank you. Board Member Lear?
This is sort of a question comment. Consistent with the public process that public officials are supposed to use, if we were to do this polling and ranking, in the end, it wouldn't look like this, but I would think our individual polls should be public records. Have you given thought to that?
We actually had a discussion, a little bit of discussion on that. I talked with Jansen. It would be available to the public.
No, because it doesn't show what. This is district. And it also, well, it doesn't show what your literal ranking.
It actually did.
And maybe I just can't see it well enough.
So if you went to Board Member 1, okay, it shows where they ranked. District 1, sorry.
Oh, okay, so those are board, as long as it's something that doesn't try to obscure, I would, I know this, that makes me dizzy to look at that, but if it said rank by board district, and then it showed how, then I would feel good about that.
This one actually does show that this grouping over here is just killer.
No,
Just look at the middle one.
I mean.
Let me back up, just maybe that's a little less.
Yeah, that's better.
So each member's.
Okay, member. I see, you have to read that sideways.
I apologize, I'm trying to go along.
It's amazing that you put this together. I would, that kind of public record, I think, is necessary if we go through that process.
Thank you.
Chair, may I say something to that effect?
Yes?
I just want to point out that this was more for illustration purposes, and as the if, in the motion here, it's a little unclear whether those votes would be put in the backup or not. And so that's something, the totals and the rankings, the number of rankings are in the motion. And so that would be up to the board members on what the motion would be. What would be put in the backup versus what could be requested. Does that make sense? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Dale. Okay, let's see, who is next? Board, I think it's Chair Huntsman.
Yeah, I've got just a little bit of concern, but if it's going to be fully transparent, then I think that's a really good thing. But the way that I understand this is that it doesn't become your ranking, that in a public meeting, after this is done, then we as a body can take a look at this information and then choose to realign our priorities. That's what I understand from the motion. But then sort of part of the context or part of the discussion was, well, then what about some of these others? Where will they go? And this is not the end game. This is just to help board members know what other board members feel is a high priority, subject to change of new information and et cetera. That's how I'm reading this motion. So the other part of this is this process. I'm worried. One of my worry is that our AAGs that really kind of protect ourselves from ourselves, that this is an individual ranking. So any dialogue, any discussion, anything that's got 8 or more board members in lobbying for my particular position will violate the Open and Public Meeting Act. So I'm sensitive to this process that we're going to find that we might find ourselves in a position of noncompliance in this. But if it's just a survey and we put our ranking in and we have full transparency in that, and we don't have the other steps of communication and dialogue that isn't privy to every board member being able to achieve, it's just, then I believe we're going to be safe. But I'd like to get AAG Brian Quisenberry to comment on is this legal and how do we stay legal?
Sure, Vice Chair, if I may.
Brian, can we just track one more question that's going to come to
Certainly.
you as well, and then we'll pick up both, so if you can remember that. Vice Chair Davis?
Yeah, my question is, to be legally compliant with open and public meetings, does it have to have our names on it? Because what we do now doesn't, we just vote for what someone proposes. So I'm wondering, is it required or is it an option? Because I know some people like it, but others might be like, I don't want them knowing I think theirs is last or whatever,
Okay,
because you only pick the top 10 anyway, ultimately.
okay, Brian?
So I understand your question, your concern, if no names were identified, it was just like member A, member B, member C, if that's legal or not? And, well, so there's 2 laws here. So there's the Open Public Meetings Act, and there's also grandma. I don't think that would violate Open and Public Meetings Act. That's more focused on 8 or more, as Chair Huntsman has indicated, discussing something, maybe have like a big conference call with 8 of you and say, how are you going to vote? This is how I'm going to vote, and let's do this and let's do that. That would definitely violate the Open and Public Meeting Act, 8 or more. But as far as grandma goes, so that's someone requesting all the details, which we provide anyway, and wanting to know who member A was and who member B was. All they're entitled to is what the documentation holds or it shows. So if there is a document that says member A is Cindy Davis, member B is, then they would be entitled to that and they would get that information. If there's no document that depicts that, then they wouldn't necessarily get that. Would the idea be to kind of maintain some anonymity or not necessarily? And I don't, you don't need to answer
We
my
have
question.
2 follow-ups right
Yeah.
here.
She can finish.
Go ahead, Cindy.
It would be purely to preserve the feelings of all the other 20 under the top 10. If we don't have to rank them, But that's just me. Others
Sure.
may feel differently.
Follow-up?
So just as a follow-up, so thank you for that, but the way I'm seeing this, and the way this is proposed, that ranking is real, and then the unintended consequences are the victims of who is not on the list. Just so everybody knows what you guys are voting for here is, once that goes public, you're saying what is relevant to you as an individual, this is what I'm getting, and what isn't relevant in your top 10, with full transparency. I'm getting lots of nods, but that's what I understand in this motion. That is on the floor, is that transparency will be there, correct? Or am I wrong?
Yes, and as I'm thinking this through, if you did have member A, member B, member C, there's got to be staff is going to have some kind of document that says member A is Cindy Davis, member B is Mark Huntsman, so that they can, I would think if there would be some document.
Can I?
Yeah, I know, I'm
can
thinking
I
that through,
comment
if
to this
there would
one,
be a
Chair?
need to identify who with who. Maybe there isn't, and if so, then you could maintain anonymity to protect those bottom tier cases from being, from
Could
obtaining information.
Could I comment to this one?
Yes.
But
Hold
you
on.
have to decide
Chair,
that.
are you done with your follow-ups?
Well, I think I didn't get a yes or no on this proposed motion. Is full transparency built into this motion of, I am Mark Huntsman, District 14. When I complete this survey, and the public will see my top 10.
And I believe that is the intent, but that's subject
Intent
to the motion
okay.
maker.
Thank you, that answers my question.
Thank you. Board Member Hanson, I'm going just a little out of order. Did you have a
Yeah,
different
sorry, it's
comment?
relevant to this one, I'm sorry. In the discussions that we had leading up to this meeting, I believe the consensus was that everyone's vote would be identified with their district. That would be given to staff. They would understand what that is. That would be presented in summary format for the backup for the meeting, but all that information would be grammable. So your information would be available to anybody that asked for it, but it wouldn't necessarily be laid out in the backup.
Yeah.
So that, my understanding at least, and that's the intent of the motion.
So,
Okay, so, Board Member Hanson, your mic's still on. Chair Huntsman, did you have to follow up
So what I'm
to that?
hearing is it's grammable, but not exposed, it's not shared directly with the public or in an open meeting, but it can be, which is different than full transparency. It's in a different place, so why not have it full transparency? Let's just be there, just like we're in an open meeting. We still get to the same place of, here's my top whatever, because that's what's being asked here, separate from our other full transparency of moving things on or off an agenda. I speak very much in favor of having full transparency if we're going to do this process and not try to hide it and wait for somebody to grandma it.
Board Member Earl?
Yes. My question is, for statistical purposes, if someone chose only to rank 1 or 2, it would not throw the whole thing off. Is that accurate?
Chair, if I may, that is accurate. You would not have to choose up to 10.
Okay.
And you would just get, if you scored 1 and 2, those would get those points, but nothing else.
Perfect.
I asked that same, sorry. Board Member Earl, I was asking that same question before too, and thinking that if I only did 2, then that would throw things off, but it doesn't. But my vote for number 3 doesn't, I don't get any value out of what I think is the third most important item.
I do understand that. I guess I would, in my view, if I were to vote, it would be just the top things that I felt were very important
Right, so you
now.
might have 3 or 4 that you.
Yeah, and then the rest of that I would want to not happen, not that, I mean, it's going to happen, but what I'm saying is those would be the priorities for me, so yeah.
Right, okay, so I appreciate that. Okay, Board Member Straight, oh, sorry, Randy.
Oh, you can go with someone else first.
I already called you, so then I'll come back to Randy.
Okay. So, even up until election of 1896, you did not necessarily have a secret ballot. But the secret ballot, of course, has become an institution of our system of government. However, once you're elected, you no longer have, when your vote is public, And so if we do this, I think it should be easily identifiable, even though sometimes it may feel uncomfortable for me to put my voice out there, my vote. Eventually, on every issue, unless I abstain, I must put my mark on that. And so I believe I'm speaking in favor, but I want to be completely transparent, because even if I do offend one of you or you offend me, that's what we do. And it's not in a mean way, it's we are fighting for our positions and we're representing our positions. And if I'm upset, well, I better get over it because now I'm an elected official. So I think I'm speaking in favor of it, but I see some pitfalls of how doing it, in my view, the correct way.
Thank you, Board Member Straight. Board Member Booth.
What I'm excited about with this motion is that it really does give us the opportunity to do our job, to carefully consider, to sort through, do our research, study it out in our minds, figure it out, and then take a stand. And we better have done that work, because everybody's going to know this is where we've decided this is what's important to us. And I think that that's so valuable, because we've got so many bright people here with so many strong opinions, representing so many different backgrounds and experiences. And so I think our constituents, and particularly Utah's children, deserve that level of commitment from all of us. And we don't have the opportunity with Robert's Rules of Order and everything else that we deal with the limited time to really talk it through to the point that we can really express where we're at. We might have 2 or 3 things that we just speak out on, and the rest we just let it go because, somebody else has got an opinion on that. And so this is our chance to really reflect where we stand and where our priorities are. And our priorities can't be there at this moment for every program, but we can take a stand on what we think is important. But we better darn well study all of the business cases so that we are making a choice and not just kind of, okay, here's my big thing. I'm going to vote for BTS. Hello, what a big surprise. And the rest of them I don't care about. I care deeply about every single one of them. And so where they fall might be tough, but I promise you, I will fight with myself until I've come up with a decision that I can sleep at nights with. And then I'll be open to learning more from all of you as we continue to refine and whatever. But here's our chance to really say what we think. And so I'm so grateful to Scott for making this, a possibility.
Thank you, Board Member Booth. Board Member Moss, I am sorry. I keep thinking my name's up there, and it's not.
Your name's up there?
That I think I'm top, and I keep going to the second one.
Oh, God, no
Sorry.
worries. No. I will second what Member Booth said. One question, just to make sure I understand the translation from the results into voting. Would any of this part, and I'm sorry if I missed this in the discussion, because I do think it's just a great idea and great opportunity. Would any of this become a presumptive list for voting purposes? Would this simply be presented and then somebody would have to move to adopt this or replace it in whole or in part with what we already did? How would that play out?
I think you're
Board
going.
Member Hanson,
If I may.
would you like to respond to that?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry for jumping in.
That's okay.
We talked about that, and I didn't want to be presumptive enough to determine what we would do with this going forward. I think we need to see how it works. And so all it says is we'll discuss the results of the rank order during the next meeting. It'll be an actionable item. We can adopt that as our ranking. We can say, hey, this didn't work. We want to throw it out. I mean, it'll be up to the voice of the board to decide what to do. I would anticipate that if it does work, we will say we'll do what we've done in the past, and we'll add new business cases, discuss those, and we'll take another vote before the next meeting and see if that order changes. That's been the process in the past. We've updated our list clear up until the legislative session. So,
Which
and
is
if I
the
can,
January meeting.
this isn't directly responsive, but as far as the transparency item, I can just say that would be a friendly amendment. We could just assume that all this data would go into backup There was no intent to hide any information. It was just a matter of how much information should be in backup and how much would just be available, separately. So it's fine with me. I think fine with everyone who was on the conference calls to try
Well,
to
we'll
work
wait
this
until
out.
an amendment is made, and then we
Well,
have,
I don't know that we need an amendment with the way this is written. It would just be, the final results could include that information. Thanks.
It doesn't say that it's programmable or anything.
you're right, it just says it will be there. Vice Chair Davis?
Yeah, after our last meeting, there were some board members who were like, how could we get more board member input in the short amount of time that we have, which is, time is always a constraint. And Superintendent Dixon actually, she should be here to speak for herself, and she can correct me if I'm wrong, but had actually said this might be a good way, next year to just start off the conversation. It might be helpful. In addition, and I think the staff list was helpful too. And I appreciate knowing what the priorities are there. I think that they work here for a reason because they're experts in the education field, and I appreciate knowing that as well. So this is just a really quick technical question, which might resolve my earlier concerns, but did you, I'm hearing people say we're rank ordering, is it up to 10, or do we anticipate taking all, 20 or 30 business cases and rank ordering the whole 25? Or are we stopping at 10?
The intent here was to stop at 10, just to make, that number of business cases would change.
That fixes
over
my
time,
other
and that
concern.
messes up all the data, I believe. So if everyone just has 10, that's the number of points they would have is, whatever that is. What do we say, 50 points total or something when you rank from 10 down to 1? But you can only give them according to your ranking.
Dale's nodding. Okay. I appreciate this discussion. Chair, did you have something else? No, I just saw you reaching. As I'm looking over this, I'm assuming that what we already voted on is still in play until we would make a change. So the rank order that we had before is still there until, if this passes, or if it doesn't, then we make a change. So the motion before the board is that the board directs staff to provide board members an opportunity to rank order business cases via survey by November 16th, that the board directs staff to provide the final results of the survey as backup to Civic Clerk for the board's discussion of funding priorities in December, and that the board discuss the results of the rank order process during the board's December meeting. Seeing no more discussion, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Those who are opposed? Voting unanimous. Thank you, Board Member Hanson, for this opportunity. Appreciate it. Okay, so we'll go on to the other part of, I got to see where we are, of 8.1, which are draft motions for different business cases. So, Dale, are you presenting on these? Thank you. Board Member Straight, sorry.
Oh,
You have a question?
No.
Oh,
We're good.
got it. Okay, got it.
Okay. Vice Chair Belknap, Chair Huntsman, board members, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Dale Frost, Fiscal Policy Analyst for the board. There were a couple, originally when we thought this was going to be a very simple information item, just to bring you up to speed on a couple more technical changes, things that we've learned over the last month. And then with the discussions with Member Hanson and his proposal, it brought up that we need to make some changes so that you have a full, accurate list to vote on. And so that's where these actions came from. I have a presentation that I'm going to kind of give you the cliff notes for. Member Moss requested that this be presented to the board. And it has to do with base funding for small districts and charter schools. So I was quickly going to go over that, but go over these 4 actions and why they need to happen, give you a little context, and then answer any questions that you may have. Does that sound good, Chair? Can we?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So I'll go over, you'll understand the district and charter school base funding business case. It is in your backups now. And I'll kind of go over the history of that and why and what it is. That's the first action, to adopt that as one of your business cases. And then part of that has to do with the economies of scale business case in that presentation. I'll also go over why we need to delay the consideration of that case for a year until not this session, but the following session. That's number 2. Number 3, we learned that there were additional carry forward that could go to the business case for the RISE assessment system business case. And so there's a change in the amount, and it's changing from ongoing to one-time request. And then the fourth was additional learning we had about the curricular fees business case. And I believe Deputy Superintendent Stallings could speak more to that case. Do you want her to do that at this point or after I go through that presentation?
Let's go
Chair?
through the order.
Okay. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly and keep things brief. Happy to answer questions for you. So this has to do with the administrative funds for small LEAs, the economies of scale business case, and then how they relate to each other. Very briefly, it feels like a long time ago, but it really wasn't, that it was really uncertain, the state's budget picture due to COVID. There was a chance that the budget hole was going to be over $1 billion. And if you remember, those who were here, we had to go through this process of identifying if we had to cut 10% of the school budget or 5% or 2%. And we had identified our worst case scenario, cutting $330 million from the base budget, not adding anything to it. Luckily, that didn't happen, and the legislature ended up actually increasing funding by $102 million, and that was for fiscal '21. But one of those cuts that were made was this line right here that says LEA administrative funding, $13,374,000, and that went to both small school districts and charter schools. One of the things so that funding went away for fiscal '21, but we knew that funding was added to other parts of the budget, but we quickly learned that that cut had pretty dramatic impacts for some of our LEAs. So what this is, I love throwing huge spreadsheets at you, I guess, and I apologize. It's not that I'm trying to make your head swim. I'm just going to point out what this is this is a comparison of what we called unrestricted funds. So these are some of the biggest programs going to school districts. Kindergarten, grades 1 through 12, professional staff. So these are the things that can go to pay for administrative costs. The administrative funds dollars were in the fiscal '20 line, but not in fiscal '21 because of that cut. So you can see that certain districts saw a year-over-year increase of, you could see Wasatch, Tooele, Nebo, Granite, were right around the 1.6% increase because there was a small increase in the WPU value. But you can see that the smaller school districts actually got a net decrease in their unrestricted funds, and that was because that $13 million cut more than offset what they got in the WPU value increase. That was news to me, and I'm pretty keyed into the budget discussion. I'm grateful for some of the BAs for pointing this out. So this became one of our business cases that we added, I think, in January for the small districts. But then the charter schools, there's more variation, but we did the same kind of analysis. Some received cuts and others received increases. In your backup, I gave you the full list if you want to look at any of the LEAs. So it became clear that we needed to have these two business cases. So we requested funding for both small districts and charter schools, somewhat different than what was before. And what happened was the legislature said, we need to figure out how to solve this for the long term. We'll give you one-time funds for this. So $8.6 million was appropriated. And so I wanted to show you that kind of same comparison, but now looking 1 year ahead. So 21 to 22, you could see that the picture's a lot better for LEAs. Rather than just the high point at 1 or 2%, you can see that school districts are now around 10 or 9% increase. And this wasn't just that one appropriation. There was also a large increase in the WPU value and a whole host of things. But you could kind of see what happened last year. This is the rest of the school districts. You can see even the lowest are right around 5%. But this includes that one-time funding increase. And here's the charter side. Some received, and there's a lot of noise in this. I wouldn't spend too much time and say, why did they receive 16%? Because there are a lot of different programs and moving parts here. But the point of this is to show you that overall, the system was a lot more, the picture was a lot more positive in 22 than 21. And so you can kind of see, now this is the broad picture of the actual total statewide programmatic level. So you can see here for school districts, grades 1 through 12, they saw a 5.6% increase, but that base funding saw almost a 200% increase, and that was that one-time funding was the increase there. So that made a big difference here. And so that begs the question, why didn't you see this on that list? I gave you 30 business cases to look at. Why not this one? That was because we were trying to figure out how this fit in with the economies of scale discussion, because these funding sources, base funding, is really to address the lack of economies of scale for small school districts. And we worked really hard over the summer and the fall, but we're not ready yet. So, you know, you saw the business case. It was somewhat of a placeholder at this point. A lot of analysis has gone into it. But I will show you that on the district side, that $3.6 million that was appropriated to small district was actually assumed in that economies of scale calculation. That's why we didn't bring it on the district side. And we were still trying to figure out and grapple with what to do on the charter side. Just a couple weeks ago, the PEA met to discuss the economies of scale business case. They called the scale of small district operations. What they recommended was that we wait for a year instead of coming up with a recommendation this December, waiting to the following December. We still need to work on that and figure out what is that formula that really can address economies of scale for small school districts and charter schools. There's more here. I wish I could go into more detail, but the point of this is that we recommend that we postpone the economies of scale business case for a year to figure out what that formula is, to really vet that with stakeholders. There's a lot more that I could tell you on that, but we don't have time. And then we brought to you that one business case to cover that one-time cost for the small district-based funding and the charter school-based funding. It's the same $8.6 million, and that's what's in your backup. So that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, I think just for one little piece of clarity, that the reason these are coming is because we've approved the business cases. So if we're going to add to them, we need to approve these new ones coming on, just for clarity there. Okay, Board Member Earl?
So let me just make sure I'm clear. The funding that we appropriated last year is what's reflective in the numbers that we're looking at, the increased numbers.
These numbers
are
here?
reflective of last year's one-time funding.
Yes.
So if nothing happens this year, we're just going to wait and see what, do you see what I'm saying? Because this is reflective of that. We're going to wait and see if there's a need for it at the last minute in the legislature. Do you see what I'm saying? Because we won't have that funding next year, so maybe it won't impact them, or maybe it will. So that I'm trying to understand that balance.
Chair, may I answer?
Go ahead.
Member Earl, the business case that's in your backups would essentially continue this.
Oh, it would continue,
At
okay.
stable
Sorry.
funding. These numbers would look a lot worse if that one-time funding went away and nothing happened.
Okay, and that's how I understood it, but then at the end of it, you said something about postponing till 2023.
Oh, that was the economies of scale.
Okay,
that-
okay.
that other business
I
case-
mixed those then, I apologize. Thanks for the clarification.
Thank you, Board Member Earl. Board Member Moss?
I'll just say thank you very much to Dale and also to Sam and Scott for pulling this together, including me. I was interested both in finance and on the charter community and just getting a sense for where we were and what could fix that. I'll just say in support of the eventual business case that in the time I've been on the board, and I shared this in finance, that we're very interested in leadership development, and we have business cases for that. We have a lot of leaders out there who feel like they don't have the time or capacity to lead because they're doing so much admin work. And so I see this as something supporting, freeing up those resources we already have. This combined with some of the issues we've been addressing on the reporting burden, I think are kind of two sides of a coin that really, hopefully, in this difficult time, gives our leaders the capacity to lead and do those things in the classroom with teachers. So that I appreciate this, and that's why, I support the business case that they put together to continue this for now, and then that EOS discussion kind of tells us where we are going forward. So, thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Moss. Okay, going on to number 3.
Let me see. Okay, yeah. So number 1 was, and number 2, I kind of covered both of those. This, you also have an updated budget tracker. These are your priorities as they stand currently. The ones that are impacted are highlighted in yellow, so that rural district economies of scale. You'll see down here that I added, you'll see that here in the full list with the amounts. You'll see now the small district and charter school-based funding. So our recommendation would add that to the list. And then the RISE assessment system, what I'll say is that we already in the original business case, as you read it, there was $3 to $4 million of carry forward that we can apply to these add-ons to the RISE assessment system. And it's my understanding, and Darren Nielsen can give a lot more detail on this, that you are going to discuss that next month. But this provides the funding mechanism if you want to move forward with any of those options. And so what we found in the last month as we worked with GOPB, we submitted the business cases as you directed us to, that there were actually $20 that we hadn't accounted for. So now we had, instead of $3 or $4 million, we had $7 million that could cover most of that. The 1.78 one time here just covers the difference there. And so if you go back and look, the previous was a 1.4 million ongoing request, and so over time that would be more funds. This is a reduction in that amount, and it's just because we've discovered more applicable funds. And so that's just more of a technical update. That's also in your backups. It doesn't change the nature of that request at all from what you've read.
So
It's
Dale,
just a
for
funding
clarity,
source
that's
issue.
just reducing the amount and changing some to one-time fund?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Lear?
A little bit of a throwback, well, it's related to this, but also to the previous discussion. I'm curious who made the decision, or where the decision came from, to call this small district and charter school funding, wherein we've got every single charter school is bigger than Rich School District and Tintic School District and probably 10 others. And to me, it feels like it should be small LEA funding as opposed to, because you've got huge charter schools too. So I'm just wondering if we have a rather outdated mindset about this.
Chair,
ahead.
if I may answer. The reason why we called that is that's what the legislature, they're two separate programs in two different parts of the budget. And one is the small district-based funding that's part of the NEST program. Charter schools don't receive NEST funding, and so there's a separate charter school-based funding program. And it's our intent to do exactly what you're saying, to try to treat it as a system, and really think of charter schools and smaller districts, not trying to just pit one against the other, but the reason why they're separate is because they're in separate parts of the budget. And then the legislature designed it as such.
Let me just, I'm
Yeah.
just not quite understanding what you're saying. So somewhere the mindset could be changed of saying this money or this pod or this appropriation is to benefit LEAs that have less than 1,000 students. I made the number up, but.
And Member Lear, that's certainly a possibility and what we can certainly look at that for the long-term fix. This is asking for a year to figure out how to do that. And this is just patching that in the current system for a year. But I agree with you that it doesn't make a lot of sense to, because, for example, one of them is part of a WPU-based program, the other one's not. And there's a question, why is that? They're all LEAs. But those would be solved with the long-term formula discussion that we're hoping to have in a year.
So that might, the question I just asked might be part of that
It should be.
discussion.
It really should be.
Thank you. Now that's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Lear. Board Member Earl?
If I remember right, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, districts advocated for the return of that funding in whatever capacity last legislative session. And the reason why there was 2 needs for it is because others were in need of the funding, and it happened to be charters and smaller school, if I'm remembering correctly. So it was kind of a 2 pieces, and that's why this was that was amend to the first piece, because it didn't adequately address the issues of the second. Anyways, but it sounds like down the road, we're going to fix that. But that's the way I remember, because there were 2 pieces. The one was to correct what didn't get done in the first, or to provide assistance, financial assistance, so.
Member, I believe that's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, it looks like we're moving on to number 4, and I believe Deputy Superintendent Stallings is going to present that. Maybe she thinks she is.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. So number 4, you may remember last month as you were discussing the business cases, a question came up about the $50 million amount and whether that would be sufficient to cover the cost of curricular fees. After that, I discussed or talked to Tammy Daly, who is the current school fees project lead, and we took a look, well, she took a look at the data that we collected on curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular fees, and she brought up a great point, which is that our co-curricular fees, just as a reminder, co-curricular activities are activities where there's a regular school day course, like choir. I think choir is a good example of a co-curricular activity, that the students often are participating in a class during the regular school day, and then there are extracurricular components, performances, and tours, et cetera, outside the regular school day. So Tammy recommended, and I as well recommend, that we update that amount from 50 to 55 million to cover the portion of the co-curricular fees that would be things like sheet music, in this case, would be an example of a fee that an LEA might charge related to that course that's really curricular in nature. It is the core instructional materials for a choir class. And so if you were to increase from 50 to 55 million, we're hoping to capture the amount of co-curricular fees that really go to support that regular school day curricular portion of the co-curricular fees. And then I think the second part was really based on some feedback from board members to try and match the language that JLC is using related to their request. So just as a reminder, this number 4, the request or the funding to reduce or offset the cost of curricular fees, it would be expanded to say curricular and co-curricular, and that really originated with JLC, not necessarily from USBE staff. But we're doing our best to also support and answer questions in their absence.
Thank you. I don't see any additional questions on that. I would be seeking a motion. Board Member Straight?
Aye.
Oh,
Yes.
you have a question?
Oh.
I do. Do you have the motion or a question?
I do, a motion, but
Okay, could I ask a question then?
You may.
Okay, just with regards to the fees and the waivers, or not, excuse me, not waivers, but getting rid of the fees. In your choir example, so many of these choirs may go to Disneyland or somewhere and have performances there. Those would all be included? Those fees would all be waived?
So, sorry if I answered.
Go ahead.
So the answer to your question is not necessarily really, I just want to clarify that it's not related to the request, because that's an extracurricular fee. We're not offsetting those, but yes, they are waivable. All fees in public schools are subject to fee waiver.
Okay, so would this business case include funding those outside of the waiver? So they go through the normal waiver process?
Yes.
Is it okay if I answer?
Yes, go ahead.
This is only about curricular and co-curricular fees, but I guess I see your point. Because those co-curricular courses could go on tour, But the only portion we're recommending the legislature, and I should say JLC is requesting, and if you were, is that it's about those fees that support the regular school day portion of school. So the 55 million would not include the costs for students to participate in tour. It would cover things like sheet music, I'm trying, instruments for band. I'm trying to think of the things that you would use in the course while you're at the school. It is not meant to offset or reduce the cost for the outside of the regular school day portion, like travel, tours, costumes, uniforms.
Okay, and follow up?
Yes.
So with that athletics, what would be covered under this?
So
Go ahead.
So trying to think in athletics, I know with football, for example, or dance, they sometimes will have weightlifting or they might have a day dance course. So maybe the access to the gym. I'm trying to think of materials that might need to be used by the volleyball. If they, a lot of our sports, they truly are extracurricular. There's not a co-curricular or inside. So I don't know, some of our principals in here might be able to give some better examples of what that would look like. But it would only be those things used in the classroom that's part of the instruction.
All right, I appreciate that. I know it's a little bit difficult. I'm trying to find the boundaries of this, and I think the boundaries are a little bit fuzzy because of, some of these courses bleed over from extracurricular, co-curricular, and curricular, right?
Board Member Hanson.
I was going to go to Board Member Hutchings. She may have a response
Okay.
as a principal.
One comment that helped clarify it for me is if it's required for your grade in the class, then it's curricular and would be included in this. But if it's not required for your grade in that class, then it would be outside of this.
That's helpful. Yes, thank you. Did you have something else, Angie?
I was just going to state that, the other difficult part of this is different schools and different districts might classify certain sports and activities as co-curricular, and others might treat them as only extracurricular. But I loved what Board Member Hutchings said. It's really about what is done inside the classroom and related to that grade is probably the best. I love that description.
Thank you so much. Board Member Laird, did you have another question?
Yes, I support this, but I think we are fooling ourselves if we don't accept that there's ambiguity. There's ambiguity from district to district, school to school, and I think it can be gamed, no pun intended, because I think I could easily argue that a football weightlifting class the students get a grade, and football players are in there, and there is equipment that's needed for that class that maybe wouldn't be needed, but the fact that they're football players. And so I just don't want us to fool ourselves that there's going to be this bright line test, and we can easily say, yes, those fees are all waived, and yes, they're not. I appreciate Stacy's definition, and that helps, but I think that we're going to have ambiguity, and we're going to have to live with it. And to pretend otherwise is not realistic.
Thank you. Vice Chair Davis?
I was going to say, I agree. And if it's during the school day, that's where the ambiguity, I guess it could be gamed, but if the, volleyball team has a weights class during the day and they use that for their PE graduation credit and they have equipment and supplies they use during the day, then yeah, that would be covered. But then, for example, if there's uniforms that they play their games every night, that would be considered extracurricular. Well, a gym suit's different than a uniform for the night game.
I got it. I appreciate your comment, Carol. Chair Huntsman?
To a lot of the questions or comments or concerns, as this moves forward, it's going to be spelled out in detail. So there's more due diligence before something changes in a statute and that funding. So what we're saying right here is kind of relevant, but not relevant, because we're not the legislature, and we will be advocating for the very things that we're hoping for through this process. So I just want to make sure to managing the expectation of the board and also the public, this is not a done deal, and it isn't completely, it's not prescribed perfectly yet.
Thank you. Board Member Straight?
Yes, thank you. We accept the motion at
Yes,
this
sir.
time? Thank you. So I move that the board, number one, adopts a district and charter school-based funding business case and transmit the business case to the governor and legislature for consideration. Excuse me, got a frog. Consideration. Two, directs staff to delay consideration of the economies of scale business case for fiscal year '23 with the intent of considering finalized formulas for a business case for fiscal year '24. Number three, directs staff to revise the amount requested for the RISE assessment system business case to $1,796,600 one time. And four, direct staff to A, increase the $50 million amount of the curricular and co-curricular fees business case to $55 million to support a reduction of curricular and co-curricular fees that relate to the regular school day course portion of the co-curricular activity, and B, update and rename the eliminate curricular fees business case to the reduce curricular and co-curricular fees business case.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Second, Board Member Lear. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, please. So I appreciate the input that has been given, and from the very beginning, the intent was that this would align with JLC and basically with all stakeholders in education. And so I didn't recognize when we put that out there that this was not completely in alignment, and I am speaking just number four for right now. So I think those changes were needed to align. I think it puts us in a better position. Yes, I appreciate Chair Huntsman pointing out that many of the details of this, which some of you have pointed out, possible pitfalls, will be worked out before this ever becomes finalized. And I appreciate just the input and the opportunity to improve this business case. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Straight. Vice Chair Davis?
Oh, just a question. I just noticed, it says at the end of number one, and transmit the business case to the governor and legislature for consideration. So would 2, 3, 4A, and 4B also be transmitted to the governor and legislature for consideration? And do we need to put that little phrase at the end of those instead of just after the beginning portion of number one?
Chair, if I may answer, Vice Chair Davis, the reason why we put that for number one, in reality, for example, the governor's office already knows about the issue with district and charter school-based funding. They're already tracking it, but it's a brand-new business case that we have not yet sent. The others relate to existing business cases. That's why we didn't add that language, but all of this, in reality, like you're saying, will be communicated to the legislature and to the governor.
Oh, then
So do you
why
need to
didn't we say
update
that at the end?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't hurt.
It says, as a friendly amendment, I would move that phrase to the end of all, the end of all of it.
I'll read it that way. I'll read it that way. Is that okay?
That is fine.
Maker of the motion. Who seconded that? Is that okay, Carol? Okay, thank you. Board Member Earl?
Yes, on number three, the questions will not be, this is for additional questions, am I right, for language arts? Is that accurate, part of that? I don't know if he's Darren, if he's.
What are you asking? Say that again.
So on number three, okay, so the part of the cost of the associated cost with number three is we're going to be adding questions from our updating of the language arts standards. Is that accurate from what I understand? And then if that's the case, are we reflective of the time frame? In other words, it won't be until we've actually approved those standards. That's all I'm asking.
Darren, let me restate. Darren, if I could restate this, and Board Member Earl, you can correct me if I heard it incorrectly, that the cost for the RISE assessment will include updating language arts questions, but those won't be updated until the language arts are approved. Is that correct?
Yeah, and let me talk a little broader about the cost options, because as we talked about the contract this morning, we talked about the overall cost, and I mentioned that there's cost options built into the contract that many of you may have read when you reviewed that contract. Item development is one of those cost options. So in our previous, in the board's previous contracts with the standards assessment development companies, whichever ones have had it in the past, we've always included item development. In order for the vendor to come in under budget on this proposal, they needed to make changes on that. So the base contract doesn't include any item development, which is would be a policy or a philosophical change of direction. So you'll see staff come before the board, probably next month in a committee, if directed by board leadership, to talk about our recommendation to execute the option to pay for continued Utah item development. This request, which we had to make quite some time ago, the legislative request to meet the budget deadline, was my effort to try to make sure that we had resources, a path to gather resources so the board could execute those options if the board chooses to. There's some other options in there, but yes, item development, which changing our ELA standards. There's a bunch of activities that take place once standards are changed by the board, and item development is potentially a big lift, depending on how substantial those changes to the core standards are.
Thank you.
Okay, so maybe just a statement. I think this articulates how important it is we get these standards right as we vote on them. So I just wanted to make sure that that was correlated, and it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Vice Chair? Vice Chair?
Yeah, just making sure I understand, on 4B where it says update the eliminate curricular fees, that's a little different than, it would rename, but in the text of the business case, would it replace the words eliminate with reduce, also in the text as well as in the title? Understanding that with legislation, there could be potential elimination of curricular fees if some point this year, next year, the next, who knows, but understanding that.
I think A does that.
Chair, if I may,
Yes.
Vice Chair Davis, if this passes, we can and will update the language across the business case to align.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no other lights at this time, the motion before the board is that we adopt the business cases, that the board adopt the district and charter-based, school-based funding business case, that the board directs staff to delay consideration of the economies of scale business case for FY23 with the intent to consider finalized formulas for the business case for FY24, that the board directs staff to revise the amount requested for the RISE assessment system business case to 1.79 one time, and that the board directs staff to increase the $50 million amount of curricular and co-curricular fees business case to $55 million to support a reduction of curricular and co-curricular fees that relate to the regular school day course portion of the co-curricular activity, and update and rename the eliminated curricular fees business case to the reduced curricular and co-curricular fees business case, and transmit the business cases to the governor and the legislature for consideration. All in favor? Those opposed? Thank you. It's unanimous. Okay, we kind of blew our time certain, didn't we? Okay, so I'm going to turn the helm over to Vice Chair Davis, and we will go on.
Do you want to quit?
Oh, maybe. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break quickly, and then we'll dive into the reports.